another burst of anger. The man who had befriended them, helped save them from the Harkonnen hunters. The man who had sent his Fremen cohorts searching for 2 strays in the desert. Another victim of the Harkonnen. Does Usul hunger yet for revenge? Farouk asked. Before Paul could answer, there came a low call, and the troop swept forward into a wider chamber, carrying Paul with them. He found himself in an open space, confronted by Stilgar and a strange woman wearing a flowing wrap-around garment of brilliant orange and green. Her arms were bare to the shoulders, and he could see she wore no stillsuit. Her skin was a pale olive. Dark hair swept back from her high forehead, throwing emphasis on sharp cheekbones and aquiline nose between the dense darkness of her eyes. She turned toward him, and Paul saw golden rings threaded with water tallies dangling from her ears. "This bested my Jameis?" she demanded. "Be silent, Hera," Stilgar said. "It was Jameis's doing. He invoked the Tahadi al-Burhan." "He's not but a boy," she said. She gave her head a sharp shake from side to side, setting the water tallies to jingling. "My children made fatherless by another child? Surely 'twas an accident." "Usul, how many years have you?" Stilgar asked. 15 standard, Paul said. Stilgar swept his eyes over the troop. "Is there one among you cares to challenge me?" Silence. Stilgar looked at the woman. "Until I've learned his weirding ways, I'd not challenge him." She returned his stare. "But you saw the stranger woman who went with you to the Reverend Mother?" Stilgar asked. "She's an out-framed Sayadina, mother to this land. The mother and son are masters of the weirding ways of battle." "Lisan al-Gaib," the woman whispered. Her eyes held awe as she turned them back toward Paul. The legend again, Paul thought. "Perhaps," Stilgar said. "It hasn't been tested, though." He returned his attention to Paul. "Usul, it's our way that you've now the responsibility for Jameis's woman here and for his 2 sons. His yali, his quarters are yours. His coffee service is yours. And this, his woman." Paul studied the woman, wondering, why isn't she mourning her man? Why does she show no hate for me? Abruptly, he saw that the Fremen were staring at him, waiting. Someone whispered, "There's work to do. Say how you accept her." Stilgar said, "Do you accept Hera as woman or servant?" Hera lifted her arms, turning slowly on one heel. "I am still young, Usul. It said I still look as young as when I was with Jeff, before Jameis bested him." Jameis killed another to win her, Paul thought. Paul said, "If I accept her as servant, may I yet change my mind at a later time?" "You'd have a year to change your decision," Stilgar said. "After that, she's a free woman to choose as she wishes. Or you could free her to choose for herself as
Hey, Mags. How you doing, bro?
Your responsibility, no matter what, for 1 year. And you'll always share some responsibility for the sons of Jameis." "I accept her as servant," Paul said. Hera stamped her foot, shook her shoulders with anger. "But I'm young." Stilgar looked at Paul, said, "Caution's a worthy trait in a man who believed." "I'm young," Hera replied. "Be silent," Stilgar commanded. "If a thing has merit, it'll be. Show Usul to his quarters and see he has fresh clothing and a place to rest." "Oh!"
How you doing, Migs?
Paul had registered enough of her to have a first approximation. He felt the impatience of the troop, knew many things were being delayed here. He wondered if he dared ask the whereabouts of his mother and Cheney, saw from Stilgar's nervous stance that it would be a mistake. He faced Hera, pitched his voice with tone and tremolo to accent her fear and awe, said, "Show me my quarters, Hera. We will discuss your youth another time." She backed away 2 steps, cast a frightened glance at Stilgar. "She has the weirding voice," she husked. "Stilgar," Paul said, "Cheney's father put heavy obligation on me. If there's anything, It'll be decided in council, Stilgar said. You can speak then. He nodded in dismissal, turned away with the rest of the troop following him. Paul took Hera's arm, noting how cool her flesh seemed, feeling her tremble. I'll not harm you, Hera, he said. Show me our quarters. And he smoothed his voice with relaxance. You will not cast me out when the year's gone, she said. I know for true I'm not as young as once I was. As long as I live, you'll have a place with me, he said. He released her arm. Come now, where are our quarters? She turned, led the way down the passage, turned right into a wide cross-tunnel lighted by evenly spaced yellow overhead globes. The stone floor was smooth, swept clean of sand. Paul moved up beside her, studied the aquiline profile as they walked. You do not hate me, Hera? Why should I hate you? She nodded to a cluster of children who stared at them from the raised ledge of a side passage. Paul glimpsed adult shapes behind the children, partly hidden by filmy hangers. I bested Jameis. Stilgar said the ceremony was held, and you're a friend of Jameis. She glanced sidelong at him. Stilgar said you gave moisture to the dead. Is that truth? Yes. It's more than I'll do. Can do. Don't you mourn him? In the time of mourning, I'll mourn him. They passed an arched opening. Paul looked through it at men and women working with stand-mounted machinery in a large, bright chamber. There seemed an extra tempo of urgency to them. What are they doing in there? Paul asked. She glanced back as they passed beyond the arch, said, Hurry to finish the quota in the plastics shop before we flee. We need many dew collectors for the planting. Flee until the butchers stop hunting or are driven from our land. Paul caught himself in a stumble, sensing an arrested instant of time, remembering a fragment, a visual projection of prescience, but it was displaced like a montage in motion. The bits of his prescient memory were not quite as he remembered them. The Sardaukar hunt us, he said. They'll see it shot too, she said, and they'll find their share of death in the sand. They'll find this place? He asked. Likely. Yet we take the time to. He motioned with his head toward the arch. Make dew collectors. The planting was on. What are dew collectors? He asked. The glance she turned on him was full of surprise. Don't they teach you anything in the... wherever it is you come from? Not about dew collectors. Hi, she said, and there was a whole conversation in the one word. Each bush, each weed you see out there in the erg, she said. How do you suppose it lives when we leave it? Each is planted most tenderly in its own little pit. The pits are filled with smooth ovals of chromoplastic. Light turns them white. You can see them glistening in the dawn if you look down from a high place. White reflects. But when Old Father Sun departs, the chromoplastic reverts to transparency in the dark. It cools with extreme rapidity. The surface condenses moisture out of the air. That moisture trickles down to keep our plants alive. Dew collectors, he muttered. The whole beauty of such a scheme. I'll mourn Jameis in the proper time for it, she said, as though her mind had not left his other question. He was a good man, Jameis, but quick to anger. A good provider, Jameis, and a wonder with the children. He made no separation between Jeff's boy, my firstborn, and his own true son. They were equal in his eyes. She turned a questing stare on Paul. Would it be that way with you, Usu? We don't have that problem. But if... Hera! Recoiled at the harsh edge in his voice. They passed another brightly lighted room, visible through an arch on their left. What's made there? He asked. They repair the weaving machinery, she said, but it must be dismantled by tonight. She gestured at a tiny box on their left. Through there and beyond, that's food processing and still suit maintenance. She looked at Paul. Your suit looks new, but if it needs work, I'm good with suits. I work in the factory in season. They began coming on knots of people now, and thicker clusterings of openings in the tunnel's sides. A file of men and carrying packs that gurgled heavily, the smell of spice strong at them. "They'll not get our water," Hera said, "or our spice. You can be sure of that." Paul glanced at the openings in the tunnel wall. Carpets on the raised ledge, glimpses of rooms with bright fabrics on the walls, piled cushions. People in the openings fell silent at their approach, followed Paul with untamed stares. "The people find it strange you bested James," Hera said. "Likely you'll have some proving to do when we're settled in a new siege." "I don't like killing." "Thus Stilgar tells it," she said, but her voice betrayed her disbelief. A shrill chanting grew louder ahead of them. They came to another side opening, wider than any of the others Paul had seen. He slowed his pace, staring in at a room crowded with children sitting cross-legged on a maroon-carpeted floor. At a chalkboard against the far wall stood a woman in a yellow wraparound, a projector stylus in one hand. The board was filled with designs: circles, wedges and curves, snake tracks and squares, flowing arcs split by parallel lines. The woman pointed to the designs one after the other as fast as she could move the stylus, and the children chanted in rhythm with her moving hand. Paul listened, hearing the voices grow dimmer behind as he moved deeper into the sietch with Hera. "Tree," the children chanted. "Tree, grass, dune, wind, mountain, hill, fire, lightning, rock, rocks, dust, sand, heat, shelter, heat, full, winter, cold, empty, erosion, summer, cavern, day, tension, moon, night, caprock, sandtide, slope, planting, binder." "You conduct classes at a time like this?" Paul asked. Her face went somber and grief edged her voice. "What Liet taught us, we cannot pause an instant in that. Liet, who is dead, must not be forgotten. It's the Jacobsa way." She crossed the tunnel to the left, stepped up onto a ledge, parted gauzy orange hangings, and stood aside. "Your Yali is ready for you, soon." Paul hesitated before joining her on the ledge. He felt a sudden reluctance to be alone with this woman. It came to him that he was surrounded by a way of life that could only be understood by postulating an ecology of ideas and values. He felt that this Fremen world was fishing for him, trying to snare him in its ways. And he knew what lay in that snare. The wild jihad, the religious war he felt he should avoid at any cost. "This is your Yali," Hera said. "Why do you hesitate?" Paul nodded, joined her on the ledge. He lifted the hangings across from her, feeling metal fibers in the fabric, followed her to a short entranceway and then into a larger room, square, about 6 meters to a side, thick blue carpets on the floor, blue and green fabrics hiding the rock walls. Glow globes tuned to yellow overhead, bobbing against draped yellow ceiling fabrics. The effect was that of an ancient tent. Hera stood in front of him, left hand on hip, her eyes studying his face. "The children are with a friend," she said. "They will present themselves later." Paul masked his unease beneath a quick scanning. Thin hangings to the right, he saw, partly concealed a larger room with cushions piled around the walls. He felt a soft breeze from an air duct, cunningly hidden in a pattern of hangings directly ahead of him. "Do you wish me to help you remove your still suit?" Hera asked. "No, thank you." "Shall I bring food?" "Yes." "There is a recon chamber off the other room," she gestured, "for your comfort and convenience when you're out of your still suit." "You said we have to leave this siege," Paul said. "Shouldn't we be packing or something?" "It will be done in its time," she said. "The butchers have yet to penetrate to our region." Still she was staring at him. "What is it?" he demanded. "You've not the eyes of the Ibad," she said. "It's strange, but not entirely unattractive." "Get the food," he said. "I'm hungry." She smiled at him. a knowing woman's smile that he found disquieting. "I am your servant," she said, and whirled away in one lithe motion, ducking behind a heavy wall hanging that revealed another passage before falling back into place. Feeling angry with himself, Paul brushed through the thin hanging on the right and into the larger room. He stood there a moment, caught by uncertainty, and he wondered where Cheney was. Cheney, who had just lost her father. "We're alike in that," he thought. A wailing cry sounded from the outer corridors, its volume muffled by the intervening hangings. It was repeated, a bit more distant. And again. Paul realized someone was calling the time. He focused on the fact that he had seen no clocks. The faint smell of burning creosote bush came to his nostrils, riding on the omnipresent stink of the siege. Paul saw that he had already suppressed the odorous assault on his senses. And he wondered again about his mother, how the moving montage of the future would incorporate her, and the daughter she bore. Mutable time awareness danced around him. He shook his head sharply, focusing his attention on the evidences that spoke of profound depth and breadth in this Fremen culture that had swallowed him, with its subtle oddities. He had seen a thing about the caverns and this room, a thing that suggested far greater differences than anything he had yet encountered. There was no indication of their use anywhere in the cave wall. Yet he could smell poisons in the siege stench. Strong ones, common ones. He heard a rustle of hanging, returning with food, and turned to watch her. Instead, from beneath a displaced pattern of hangings, he saw two young boys, perhaps aged 9 and 10, staring out at him with greedy eyes. Each wore a small kinjal type of crysknife, rested a hand on the hilt. And Paul recalled the stories of the Fremen, that their children fought as ferociously as the adults.
The hands move, the lips move, ideas gush from his words, and his eyes devour. He is an island of selfdom. Description from a Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
Phosphor tubes in the faraway upper reaches of the cavern cast dim light onto the thronged interior, hinting at the great size of this rock-enclosed space. Larger, Jessica saw, than even the gathering hall of her Bene Gesserit school. She estimated there were more than 5,000 people gathered out there beneath the ledge where she stood with Stilgar. And more were coming. The air was murmurous with people. "Your son has been summoned from his rest, Sayadina," Stilgar said. "Do you want to be fair in your decision?" Could he change my decision? "Certainly. The air with which you speak comes from your own lungs, but the decision stands," she said. But she felt misgivings, wondering if she should use Paul as an excuse for backing out of a dangerous course. There was an unborn daughter to think of as well. What endangered the flesh of the mother endangered the flesh of the daughter. Men came with rolled carpets, grunting under the weight of them, stirring up dust as the loads were dropped onto the ledge. Stilgar took her arm, led her back into the acoustical horn that formed the rear limits of the ledge. He indicated a rock bench within the hall. "The Reverend Mother will sit here, but you may rest yourself until she comes." "I prefer to stand," Jessica said. She watched the men unroll the carpets covering the ledge, looked out at the crowd. There were at least 10,000 people on the rock floor now, and still they came. Out on the desert, she knew, it already was red nightfall, but here in the cavern hall was perpetual twilight, a grey vast thronged with people come to see her risk her life. A way was opened through the crowd to her right, and she saw Paul approaching, flanked by 2 small boys. There was a swaggering air of self-importance about the children. They kept hands on knives, scowled at the wall of people on either side. "The sons of Jamis, one the sons of Usul," Stilgar said. "They take their escort duties seriously." He ventured a smile at Jessica. Jessica was in her mood and was grateful for it. but could not take her mind from the danger that confronted her. I have no choice but to do this, she thought. We must move swiftly if we're to secure our place among these Fremen. Paul climbed up to the ledge, leaving the children below. He stopped in front of his mother, glanced at Stilgar, back to Jessica. What is happening? I thought I was being summoned to council. Stilgar raised a hand for silence, gestured to his left where another way had been opened in the throng. Chani came down the lane opened there, her elfin face set in lines of grief. She had removed her stillsuit and wore a graceful blue wraparound that exposed her thin arms. Near the shoulder on her left arm, a green kerchief had been tied. Green for mourning, Paul thought. It was one of the customs the two sons of Jameis had explained to him by indirection, telling him they wore no green because they accepted him as guardian father. Are you the Lisan al-Gaib? They had asked, and Paul had sensed the jihad in their words, shrugging off the question with one of his own, learning then that Kelef, the elder of the two, was 10, and the natural son of Jer. Orlok, the younger, was 8, the natural son of James. It had been a strange day with these two standing guard over him, because he asked it, keeping away the curious, allowing him the time to nurse his thoughts and prescient memories, to plan a way to prevent the jihad. Now, standing beside his mother on the cavern ledge and looking out at the throng, he wondered if any plan could prevent the wild outpouring of fanatic legions. Chani, near the ledge, was followed at a distance by 4 women carrying another woman in a litter. Jessica ignored Chani's approach, focusing all her attention on the woman in the litter, a crone, a wrinkled and shriveled ancient thing in a black gown with hood thrown back to reveal the tight knot of grey hair and the stringy neck. The litter carriers deposited their burden gently on the ledge from below, and Chani helped the old woman to her feet. So this is their reverend mother, Jessica thought. The old woman leaned heavily on Chani as she hobbled toward Jessica, looking like a collection of sticks in the black robe. She stopped in front of Jessica, peered upward for a long moment before speaking in a husky whisper. So, you're the one. The old head nodded once precariously on the thin neck. The Shadow Mapes was right to pity you. Jessica spoke quickly, scornfully. I need no one's pity. That remains to be seen, husked the old woman. She turned with surprising quickness and faced the throng. Tell them, Stilgar. Must I? He asked. We are the people of Misr, the old woman rasped. Since our Sunni ancestors fled from Nilotek al-Uruba, we have known flight and death. The young go on, that our people shall not die. Stilgar took a deep breath, stepped forward 2 paces. Jessica felt the hush come over the crowded cavern, some 20,000 people now standing silently, almost without movement. It made her feel suddenly small and filled with caution. Tonight we must leave this siege that has sheltered us for so long, and go south into the desert, Stilgar said. His voice boomed out across the uplifted faces, reverberating with the force given it by the acoustical horn behind the ledge. Still the throng remained silent. The Reverend Mother tells me she cannot survive another Hajra, Stilgar said. We have lived before without a Reverend Mother, but it is not good for people to seek a new home in such straits. Now the throng stirred, rippling with whispers and currents of disquiet. That this may not come to pass, Stilgar said. Our new Sayadina Jessica of the Weirding has consented to enter the rite at this time. She will attempt to pass within, that we not lose the strength of our Reverend Mother. Jessica of the Weirding, Jessica thought. She saw Paul staring at her, his eyes filled with questions, but his mouth held silent by all the strangeness around them. if I die in the attempt, what will become of him? Jessica asked herself. Again she felt the misgivings fill her mind. Cheney led the old Reverend Mother to a rock bench deep in the acoustical horn, returned to stand beside Stilgar. That we may not lose all if Jessica of the Weirding should fail, Stilgar said. Cheney, daughter of Liet, will be consecrated in the Sayadina at this time. He stepped one pace to the side. From deep in the acoustical horn, the old woman's voice came out to them, an amplified whisper, harsh and penetrating. Cheney has returned from her Hajra. Cheney has seen the waters. A susurrant response arose from the crowd. She has seen the waters. I consecrate the daughter of Liet in the Sayadina, husked the old woman. She is accepted, the crowd responded. Paul barely heard the ceremony, his attention still centered on what had been said of his mother. If she should fail. He turned and looked back at the one they called Reverend Mother, studying the dried crone features, the fathomless blue fixation of her eyes. She looked as though a breeze would blow her away, yet there was that about her which suggested she might stand untouched in the path of a Coriolis storm. She carried the same aura of power that he remembered from the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohan, who had tested him with agony in the way of the Gom Jabbar. I, the Reverend Mother Ramallo, whose voice speaks as a multitude, say this to you, the old woman said. It is fitting that Cheney enter the Sayadina. It is fitting, the crowd responded. The old woman nodded, whispered, I give her the silver skies, the golden desert and its shining rocks, the green fields that will be. I give these to Sayadina Cheney. And lest she forget that she's servant of us all, to her fall the menial tasks in this ceremony of the seed. Let it be as Shai Hulud will have it. She lifted a brown stick arm, dropped it. Jessica, feeling the ceremony close around her with a current that swept her beyond all turning back, glanced once at Paul's question-filled face, then prepared herself for the ordeal. Let the water masters come forward, Cheney said, with only the slightest quaver of uncertainty in her girl-child voice. Now Jessica felt herself at the focus of danger, knowing its presence in the watchfulness of the throng, in the silence. A band of men made its way through a serpentine path opened in the crowd, moving up from the back in pairs. Each pair carried a small skin sack, perhaps twice the size of a human head. The sacks sloshed heavily. The two leaders deposited their load at Cheney's feet on the ledge and stepped back. Jessica looked at the sack, then at the men. They had their hoods thrown back, exposing long hair tied in a roll at the base of the neck. The black pits of their eyes stared back at her without wavering. A furry redolence of cinnamon arose from the sack, wafted across Jessica. The spice? She wondered. Is there water? Cheney asked. The watermaster on the left, a man with a purple scar line across the bridge of his nose, nodded once. There is water, Sayadina, he said, but we cannot drink of it. Is there seed? Cheney asked. There is seed, the man said. Cheney knelt and put her hands to the sloshing sack. Blessed is the water and its seed. There was familiarity to the right, and Jessica looked back at the Reverend Mother Amala. The old woman's eyes were closed, and she sat hunched over as though a... Sayadina Jessica, Cheney said. Jessica turned to see the girl staring up at her. Have you tasted the blessed water? Cheney asked. Before Jessica could answer, Cheney said, It is not possible that you have tasted the blessed water. You are outworlder and unprivileged. A sigh passed through the crowd, a susurration of robes that made the nape hairs creep on Jessica's neck. The crop was large, and the maker has been destroyed, Cheney said. She began unfastening a coiled spout fixed to the top of the sloshing bag. Now, Jessica felt the sense of danger boiling around her. She glanced at Paul, saw that he was caught up in the mystery of the ritual and had eyes only for Cheney. Has he seen this moment in time? Jessica wondered. She rested a hand on her abdomen, thinking of the unborn daughter there, asking herself, do I have the right to risk us both? Cheney lifted the spout toward Jessica, said, Here is the water of life, the water that is greater than water can, the water that frees the soul. If you be a Reverend Mother, it opens the universe to you. Let Shai Hulud judge now. Jessica felt herself torn between duty to her unborn child and duty to Paul. For Paul, she knew, she should take that spout and drink of the sack's contents. But as she bent to the proffered spout, her senses told her its peril. The stuffy sack had a bitter smell, subtly akin to many poisons that she knew, but unlike them too. You must drink it now, Cheney said. There's no turning back, Jessica reminded herself. But nothing, all her Bene Gesserit training came into her mind to help her through this instant. What is it? Jessica asked herself. A liquor? A drug? She bent over the spout, smelling the esters of cinnamon, remembering then the drunkenness of Duncan, Idaho. Spice liquor? She asked herself. She took the siphon tube in her mouth, pulled up only the most minuscule sip. It tasted of the spice, a faint bite acrid on the tongue. Cheney pressed down on the skin bag. A great gulp of the stuff surged into Jessica's mouth, and before she could help herself, she swallowed it, fighting to retain her calmness and dignity. To accept a little death is worse than death itself, Cheney said. She stared at Jessica, waiting. And Jessica stared back, still holding the spout in her mouth. She tasted the sack's contents in her nostrils, in the roof of her mouth, in her cheeks, in her eyes, a biting sweetness now. Cool. Again, Cheney sent the liquid gushing into Jessica's mouth. Delicate. Jessica studied Cheney's face, elfin features, seeing the traces of liet kynes there as yet unfixed by time. This is a drug they feed me, Jessica told herself. But it was unlike any other drug of her experience, and Bene Gesserit training included the taste of many drugs. Cheney's features were so clear, as though outlined in light. A drug. Whirling silence settled around Jessica. Every fiber of her body accepted the fact that something profound had happened to it. She felt that she was a conscious mote, smaller than any subatomic particle, yet capable of motion and of sensing her surroundings. Like an abrupt revelation, the curtains whipped away, she realized she had become aware of a psychokinesthetic extension of herself. She was the mote, yet not the mote. The cavern remained around her. The people. She sensed them. Paul, Cheney, Stilgar, the Reverend Mother Amalu. Reverend Mother. At the school there had been rumors that some did not survive the Reverend Mother ordeal, that the drug took them. Jessica focused her attention on the Reverend Mother Amalu, aware now that all this was happening in a frozen instant of time, suspended time for her alone. Why is time suspended? She asked herself. She stared at the frozen expressions around her, seeing a dust mote above Cheney's head, stopped there, waited. The answer to this instant came like an explosion in her consciousness. Her personal time was suspended to save her life. She focused on the psychokinesthetic extension of herself, looking within, and was confronted immediately with a cellular core, a pit of blackness from which she recoiled. That is the place where we cannot look, she thought. There is the place the Reverend Mothers are so reluctant to mention. The place where only Kwisatz Haderach may look. This realization returned a small measure of confidence, and again, She ventured to focus on the psychokinesthetic extension, becoming a mote self that searched within her for danger. She found it within the drug she had swallowed. The stuff was dancing particles within her, its motions so rapid that even frozen time could not stop them. Dancing particles. She began recognizing familiar structures, atomic linkages, a carbon atom here, helical wavering, a glucose molecule. An entire chain of molecules confronted her, and she recognized a protein, a methyl protein configuration. Ah! It was a soundless mental sigh within her as she saw the nature of the poison. With her psychokinesthetic probing, she moved into it, shifted an oxygen mote, allowed another carbon mote to link, reattached a linkage of oxygen, hydrogen. The change spread, faster and faster as the catalyzed reaction opened its surface of contact. The suspension of time relaxed its hold upon her, and she sensed motion. The tube spout from the sac was touched to her mouth, gently, collecting a drop of moisture. Chain is taking the catalyst from my body to change the poison in that sac, Jessica thought. Why? Someone eased her to a sitting position. She saw the old Reverend Mother Amalo being brought to sit beside her on the carpeted ledge. A dry hand touched her neck. And there was another psychokinesthetic mote within her awareness. Jessica tried to reject it, but the mote swept closer, closer. They touched. It was like an ultimate simpatico, being two people at once. Not telepathy, but mutual awareness. With the old Reverend Mother. But Jessica saw that the Reverend Mother didn't think of herself as old. An image unfolded before the mutual mind's eye. A young girl with a dancing spirit and tender humor. Within the mutual awareness, the young girl spoke.
Yes, that is how I am.
Jessica could only accept the words, not respond to them.
You'll have it all soon, Jessica.
This is hallucination, Jessica told herself.
You know better than that. Swiftly now. Do not fight me. There isn't much time. You should have told us we're pregnant.
Jessica found the voice that talked within the mutual awareness.
Why?
This changes both of you. Holy Mother, what have we done?
Jessica sensed a forced shift in the mutual awareness, saw another mote presence with the inward eye. The other mote darted wildly here, there, circling. It radiated pure terror.
You'll have to be strong. Be thankful it's a daughter you carry. This would have killed a male fetus. Now, carefully, gently, touch your daughter presence. Be your daughter presence. Absorb the fear. Soothe. Use your courage and your strength. Gently now. Gently.
The other whirling mote swept near, and Jessica compelled herself to touch it. Terror threatened to overwhelm her. She fought it the only way she knew. I shall not fear. Fear is the mind killer. The litany brought a semblance of calm. The other mote lay quiescent against her. Words won't work, Jessica told herself. She reduced herself to basic emotional reactions, radiated love, comfort, a warm snuggling of protection. The terror receded. Again, the presence of the old Reverend Mother asserted itself, but now there was a tripling of mutual awareness, two active, and one that lay quietly absorbing.
Time compels me. I have much to give you, and I do not know if your daughter can accept all this while remaining sane. But it must be. The needs of the tribe are paramount.
What?
Remain silent and accept.
Experiences began to unroll before Jessica. It was like a lecture strip in a subliminal training projector at the Bene Gesserit school, but faster. Blindingly faster. Yet distinct. She knew each experience as it happened. There was a lover, virile, bearded, with the Fremen eyes, and Jessica saw his strength and tenderness, all of him in one blink moment, through the Reverend Mother's memory. There was no time now to think of what this might be doing to the daughter fetus, only time to accept and record. The experiences poured in on Jessica: birth, life, death, important matters and unimportant, an outpouring of single view time. Why should a fall of sand from a cliff top stick in the memory? She asked herself. Too late, Jessica saw what was happening. The old woman was dying, and in dying, pouring her experiences into as water is poured into a cup. The other mote faded back into pre-birth awareness as Jessica watched it. And, dying in perception, the old Reverend Mother left her life in Jessica's memory with one last, sighing blur of words.
I've been a long time waiting for you. Here is my life.
Was encapsulated, all of it, even the moment of death. I am now a Reverend Mother, Jessica realized. And she knew with a generalized awareness that she had become, in truth, precisely what was meant by a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. The poison drug had transformed her. This wasn't exactly how they did it at the Bene Gesserit school, she knew. No one had ever introduced her to the mysteries of it, but she knew. The end result was the same. Jessica sensed the daughter mote still touching her inner awareness, probed it without response. A terrible sense of loneliness crept through Jessica in the realization of what had happened to her. She saw her own life as a pattern that had slowed, and all life around her speeded up so that the dancing interplay became clearer. The sensation of mote awareness faded slightly, its intensity easing as her body relaxed from the threat of the poison, but still she felt that other mote, touching it with a sense of guilt at what she had allowed to happen to it. I did it, my poor, unformed, dear little daughter. I brought you into this universe and exposed your awareness to all its varieties without any defenses. A tiny outflowing of love comfort, like a reflection of what she had poured into it, came from the other mote. Before Jessica could respond, she felt the undubbed presence of demanding memory. There was something that needed doing. She groped for it, realizing she was being impeded by a muzziness of the changed drug permeating her senses. I could change that, she thought. I could take away the drug action and make it harmless. But she sensed this would be an error. I'm within a right of joining. Then she knew what she had to do. Jessica opened her eyes, gestured to the water sack now being held above her by Cheney.
It has been blessed. Mingle the waters. Let the change come to all, that the people may partake and share in the blessing.
Let the catalyst do its work, she thought. Let the people drink of it and have their awareness of each other heightened for a while. The drug is safe now that a Reverend Mother has changed it. Still, the demanding memory worked on her, thrusting. There was another thing she had to do, she realized, but the drug made it difficult to focus. Ah, the old Reverend Mother.
I have met the Reverend Mother Ramallo. She is gone, but let her memory be honored in the rite.
Now, where did I get those words? Jessica wondered. And she realized they came from another memory, the life that had been given to her and now was part of herself. Something about that gift felt incomplete, though.
Let them have their orgy. They've little enough pleasure out of living. Yes, and you and I need this little time to become acquainted before I receive and pour out through your memories. Already, I feel myself being tied to bits of you. Ah, you've a mind filled with interesting things. So many things I'd never imagined.
And the memory mind encapsulated within her opened itself to Jessica, permitting a view down a wide corridor to other Reverend Mothers until there seemed no end to them. Jessica recoiled, fearing she'd become lost in an ocean of oneness. Still, the corridor remained, revealing to Jessica that the Fremen culture was far older than she had suspected. On Porotrin, she saw, a people grown soft with an easy planet, fair game for Imperial raiders to harvest and plant human colonies on Bella Teguz, and Salusa Secundus. Oh, that party. Far down the corridor, an image voice screamed, "They denied us the Hajj!" Jessica saw the slave cribs on Bela Tegus down that inner corridor, saw the weeding out and the selecting that spread men to Rossack and Harmanthan. Scenes of ferocity opened to her like the petals of a terrible flower, and she saw the thread of the past carried by Sayadina after Sayadina, first by word of mouth hidden in the sand shanties, then refined through their own reverend mothers with the discovery of the poison drug, and now developed to subtle strength on Arrakis in the discovery of the water of life. Far down the inner corridor, another voice screamed, "Never to forgive! Never to forget!" But Jessica's attention was focused on the revelation of the water of life, seeing its source, the liquid exhalation of a dying sandworm, a maker. And as she saw the killing of it in her new memory, she suppressed a gasp. The creature was drowned.
Mother, are you all right?
Paul's voice intruded on her, and Jessica struggled out of the inner awareness to stare up at him, conscious of duty to him, but resenting his presence. I'm like a person whose hands were kept numb, without sensation from the first moment of awareness, until one day the ability to feel is forced into them. The thought hung in her mind, an enclosing awareness. And I say, "Look, I have no hands." But the people all around me say, "What are hands?"
Are you all right?
Yes.
Is this all right for me to drink?
He gestured to the sack in Cheney's hands.
They want me to drink it.
Heard a hidden meaning in his words, realized he had detected the poison in the original unchanged substance, that he was concerned for her. It occurred to Jessica then to wonder about the limits of Paul's prescience. His question revealed much to her.
You may drink it. It has been changed.
And she looked beyond him to see Stilgar staring down at her, the dark, dark eyes studying.
Now we know you cannot be false.
She sensed hidden meaning here, too. But the muzziness of the drug was overpowering her senses. How warm it was, and soothing. How beneficent these Fremen to bring her into the fold of such companionship. Paul saw the drug take hold of his mother. He searched his memory, the fixed past, the flux lines of the possible futures. It was like scanning through arrested instants of time, disconcerting to the lens of the inner eye. The fragments were difficult to understand when snatched out of the flux. This drug, he could assemble knowledge about it, understand what it was doing to his mother, but the knowledge lacked a natural rhythm, lacked a system of mutual reflection. He realized suddenly that it was one thing to see the past occupying the present, but the true test of prescience was to see the past in the future. Things persisted in not being what they seemed.
Drink it.
Cheney waved the horn spout of a water sack under his nose. Paul straightened, staring at Cheney. He felt carnival excitement in the air. He knew what would happen if he drank this spice drug with its quintessence of the substance that brought the change onto him. He would return to the vision of pure time, of time becomes space. It would perch him on the dizzying summit and defy him to understand. From behind Cheney, Stilgar spoke.
Drink it, lad. You delay the right.
Paul listened to the crowd then, hearing the wildness in their voices. "Lisan al-Gaib," they said. "Muad'Dib." He looked down at his mother. She appeared peacefully asleep, in a sitting position, her breathing even and deep. A phrase out of the future that was his lonely past came into his mind. She sleeps in the waters
Oh,
of
that tattoo
life.
is definitely itchy.
Cheney tugged at his sleeve. Paul took the horn spout into his mouth, heard the people shout. He felt the liquid gush into his throat as Cheney pressed the sack, sensed giddiness in the fumes. Cheney removed the spout, handed the sack into hands that reached for it from the floor of the cavern. His eyes focused on her arm, the green band of mourning there. As she straightened, Cheney saw the direction of his gaze.
I can mourn him even in the happiness of the waters.
This was something he gave us.
She put her hand into his, pulling him along the ledge.
We are alike in a thing, Usul. We have each lost a father to the Harkons.
Paul followed her. He felt that his head had been separated from his body and restored with odd connections. His legs were remote and rubbery. They entered a narrow side passage, its walls illuminated by spaced-out glow globes. Paul felt the drug beginning to have its unique effect on him, opening time like a flower. He found need to steady himself against Cheney as they turned through another shadowed tunnel. The mixture of whipcord and softness he felt beneath her robe stirred his blood. The sensation mingled with the work of the drug, folding future and past into the present, leaving him the thinnest margin of trinocular focus.
I know you, Cheney. We've sat upon a ledge above the sand while I soothed your fears. We've caressed in the dark of the CH.
Paul found himself losing focus, tried to shake his head, stumbled. Cheney steadied him, led him through thick hangings into the yellow warmth of a private apartment, low tables, cushions, a sleeping pad beneath an orange spread. Paul grew aware that they had stopped, that Cheney stood facing him, and that her eyes betrayed a look of quiet terror.
You must tell me.
You are Sihaya, the desert spring.
When the tribe shares the water, we're together. All of us. We share. I can sense the others with me, but I'm afraid to share with you.
Why?
He tried to focus on her, but past and future were merging into the present, blurring her image. He saw her in countless ways and positions and
There's something frightening in you. When I took you away from the others, I did it because I could feel what the others wanted. You press on people. You make us see things.
You see.
Paul had forced himself to speak distinctly. She looked down at her hands.
I see a child in my arms. It's our child. Yours and mine.
Hand to her mouth.
How can I know every feature of you?
They've a little of the talent, his mind told him, but they suppress it because it terrifies. In a moment of clarity, he saw how Cheney was trembling.
What is it you want to say?
Usul.
Cannot back into the future.
A profound compassion for her swept through him. He pulled her against him, stroked her head.
Cheney. Cheney, don't fear.
Usul, help me.
As she spoke, he felt the drug complete its work within him, ripping away the curtains to let him see the distant grey turmoil of his future.
You're so quiet.
He held himself poised in the awareness, seeing time stretch out in its weird dimension, delicately balanced yet whirling, narrow yet spread like a net, gathering countless worlds and forces, a tight wire that he must walk, yet a teeter-totter on which he balanced. On one side he could see the Imperium, a Harkonnen called Fade Routher who flashed toward him like a deadly blade, the Sardaukar raging off their planet to spread pogrom on Arrakis, the Guild conniving and plotting, the Bene Gesserit with their scheme of selective breeding. They lay massed like a thunderhead on his horizon, held back by no more than the Fremen and their Muad'Dib, the sleeping giant Fremen, poised for their wild crusade across the universe. Paul felt himself at the center, at the pivot, where the whole structure turned, walking a thin wire of peace with a measure of happiness, Cheney at his side. He could see it stretching ahead of him, a time of relative quiet in a hidden sietch, a moment of peace between periods of violence.
There's no other place for peace.
Usul, you're crying. Usul, my strength. Do you give moisture to the dead? To who's dead?
To one's not yet dead.
Then let them have their time of life.
He sensed through the drug fog how right she was, pulled her against him with savage pressure.
Sihaya!
She put a palm against his cheek.
I'm no longer afraid, Usul. Look at me. I see what you see when you hold me thus.
What do you see?
I see us giving love to each other in a time of quiet between storms. It's what we were meant to do.
The drug had him again, and he thought, so many times you've given me comfort and forgetfulness. He felt anew the hyper-illumination with its high-relief imagery of time, sensed his future becoming memories, the tender indignities of physical love, the sharing and communion of cells, the softness and the violence.
You're the strong one, Cheney. Stay with me.
Always.
And she kissed his cheek. Book 3. The Prophet.
No woman, no man, no child ever was deeply... The closest anyone ever came to casual camaraderie with the Padishah Emperor was the relationship offered by Count Casimir Fenring, a companion from childhood. The measure of Count Fenring's friendship may be seen first in a positive thing. He allayed the Landsrod's suspicions after the Arrakis affair. It cost more than 1 billion solaris in spice bribes, so my mother said, and there were other gifts as well. Slave women, royal honors, and tokens of rank. The second major evidence of the Count's friendship was negative. He refused to kill a man even though it was within his capabilities, and my father commanded it. I will relate this presently. Count Fenring, a profile by the Princess Irulan.
The Baron Vladimir Harkonnen raised the door from his private apartments, flitting through patches of late afternoon sunlight that poured down from high windows. He bobbed and twisted in his suspensors with violent movements. Past the private kitchen he stormed, past the library, past the small reception room, and into the servants' antechamber where the evening relaxation already had set in. The guard captain, Eokin Nefud, squatted on a divan across the chamber, the stupor of Semuta dullness in his flat face, the eerie wailing of Semuta music around him. His own court sat near to do his bidding. "Nefud!" the Baron roared. Men scrambled. Nefud stood, his face composed by the narcotic, but with an overlay of paleness that told of his fear. The Semuta music had stopped. "Baron," Nefud said. Only the drug kept the trembling out of his voice. The Baron scanned the faces around him, seeing the looks of frantic. He returned his attention to Nefud and spoke in a silken tone. "How long have you been my guard, Captain Nefud?" Nefud swallowed. "Since Arrakis, my lord. Almost 2 years." "And have you always anticipated dangers to my person?" "Such has been my only desire, my lord." "Then where is Fade Rotha?" the Baron roared. Nefud recoiled. "My lord, you do not consider Fade Rotha a danger to my person?" Again the voice was silken. Nefud wet his lips with his tongue. Some of the Semuta dullness left his eyes. "Fade Rotha's in the slave quarters, my lord." "With the women again, eh?" The Baron trembled with the effort of suppressing anger. "Sire, it could be he's..." "Silence!" The Baron advanced another step into the antechamber, noting how the men moved back, clearing a subtle space around Nefud, dissociating themselves from the object of wrath. "Did I not command you to know precisely where the Baron was at all times?" the Baron asked. He moved a step closer. "Did I not say to you that you were to know precisely what the Baron was saying at all times? And to whom?" Another step. "Did I not say to you that you were to tell me whenever he went into the quarters of the slave women?" Nefud swallowed. Perspiration stood out on his forehead. The Baron held his voice flat, almost devoid of emphasis. "Did I not say these things to you?" Nefud nodded. "And did I not say to you that you were to check all slave boys sent to me, and that you were to do this yourself, personally?" Again, Nefud nodded. "Did you perchance not see the blemish on the thigh of the one sent me this evening? The Baron asked. Is it possible you... Uncle! The Baron whirled, stared at Feyd-Rautha standing in the doorway. The presence of his nephew here, now, the look of worry that the young man could not quite conceal, all revealed much. Feyd-Rautha had his own spy system focused on the Baron. There is a body in my chambers that I wish removed, the Baron said, and he kept his hand at the projectile weapon beneath his robes, thankful that his shield was the best. Feyd-Rautha glanced at two guardsmen against the right wall, nodded. The two detached themselves, scurried out the door and down the hall toward the Baron's apartments. Those two men, the Baron thought. Ah, this young monster has much to learn yet about conspiracy.
What do you say?
I presume you left matters peaceful in the slave quarters, Feyd?
You say. All the way.
Said. I've been playing Cheops with the slave master, Feyd-Rautha said, and he thought, what has gone wrong? The boy we sent to my uncle has obviously been killed, but he was perfect for the job. Even Howard couldn't have made a better choice. The boy was perfect. Playing pyramid chess, the Baron said. How nice. Did you win? Yes, uncle. And Feyd-Rautha strove to contain his disquiet. The Baron snapped his fingers. Nephew, you wish to be restored to my good graces? Sire, what have I done? Nephew quavered. That's unimportant now, the Baron said. Feyd has beaten the slave master at Cheops. Did you hear that? Yes, sire. I wish you to take 3 men and go to the slave master, the Baron said. Garrot, the slave master. Bring his body to me when you've finished, that I may see it is done properly. We cannot have such inept chess players in our employ. Feyd-Rautha went pale, took a step forward. But uncle, Later, Feyd, the Baron said, and waved a hand. Later. The two guards who had gone to the Baron's quarters for the slave boy's body staggered past the antechamber door with their load sagging between them, arms trailing. The Baron watched until they were out of sight. Nefud stepped up beside the Baron. You wish me to kill the slave master now, my lord? Now, the Baron said. And when you've finished, add those 2 past to your list. I don't like the way they carried that body. One should do such things neatly. I'll wish to see their carcasses, too. Nefud said, My lord, is it anything that I've do as your master has ordered? Feyd-Rautha said. And he thought, all I can hope for now is to save my own skin. Good, the Baron thought. He yet knows how to cut his losses. And the Baron smiled inwardly at himself, thinking, the lad knows, too, what will please me and be most apt to stay my wrath from falling on him. He knows I must preserve him. Who else do I have who could take the reins I must leave someday? I have no other capable. But he must learn, and I must preserve myself while he's learning. Nefud signaled men to assist him, led them out the door. Would you accompany me to my chambers, Feyd? The Baron asked. I am yours to command, Feyd-Rautha said. He bowed, thinking, I'm caught. After you, the Baron said, and he gestured to the door. Feyd-Rautha indicated his fear by only the barest hesitation. Have I failed utterly? He asked himself. Will he slip a poisoned blade into my back, slowly, through the shield? Does he have an alternative successor? Let him experience this moment of terror, the Baron thought, as he walked along behind his nephew. He will succeed me, but at a time of my choosing. I'll not have him throwing away what I built. Feyd-Rautha tried not to walk too swiftly. He felt the skin crawling on his back, as though his body itself wondered when the blow could come. His muscles alternately tensed and relaxed. Have you heard the latest word from Arrakis? The Baron asked. No, uncle. Feyd-Rautha forced himself not to look back. He turned down the hall out of the servants' wing. They've a new prophet or religious leader of some kind among the Fremen, the Baron said. They call him Muad'Dib. Very funny, really. It means the mouse. I've told Raban to let them have their religion. It'll keep them occupied. That's very interesting, Uncle, Feyd-Rautha said. He turned into the private corridor to his uncle's quarters, wondering, why does he talk about religion? Is it some subtle hint to me? Yes, isn't it? The Baron said. They came into the Baron's apartments through the reception salon to the bedchamber. Subtle signs of a struggle greeted them here. A suspensor lamp on the floor. A soother reel spilled open across a bedstand.
It was a clever plan.
The Baron kept his body shield tuned to maximum. Stopped, facing his nephew.
But not clever enough. Tell me, Feyd, why didn't you strike me down yourself? You've had opportunity enough.
Feyd-Rautha found a suspensor chair, accomplished a mental shrug as he sat down in it without being asked. I must be bold now, he thought.
You taught me that my own hands must remain clean.
Ah, yes. When you face the Emperor, you must be able to say truthfully that you did not do the deed. The witch at the Emperor's elbow will hear your words and know their truth or falsehood. Yes, I warned you about that.
Why haven't you ever bought a Bene Gesserit, Uncle? With a truthsayer at your side.
You know my tastes.
Feyd-Rautha studied his uncle.
Still, one would be valuable for...
Shut them not, and stop trying to change the subject.
As you wish, Uncle.
I remember a time in the arena several years ago. It seemed there that day a slave had been set to kill you. Is that truly how it was?
It's been so long ago, Uncle. After all,
No evasions, please.
Feyd-Rautha looked at his uncle, thinking, he knows, else he wouldn't ask.
It was a sham, Uncle. I arranged it to discredit your slave master.
Very clever. Brave, too. That slave gladiator almost took you, didn't he?
Yes.
If you had finesse and subtlety to match such courage, you'd be truly formidable.
The Baron shook his head from side to side. As he had done many times since that terrible day on Arrakis, he found himself regretting the loss of Piter the Mentat. There had been a man of delicate, devilish subtlety. It hadn't saved him, though. Again, the Baron shook his head. Fate was sometimes inscrutable. Feyd-Rautha glanced around the bedchamber, studying the signs of the struggle, wondering how his uncle had overcome the slave they prepared so carefully.
Best them? Ah. Now, Feyd. Let me keep some weapons to preserve me in my old age. It's better we use this time to strike a bargain.
Feyd-Rautha stared at him. A bargain? He means to keep me as his heir for certain, then. Else why bargain? One bargains with equals, or near equals.
What bargain, Uncle?
And Feyd-Rautha felt proud that his voice remained calm and reasonable, betraying none of the elation that filled him. The Baron, too, noted the control. He nodded.
You're good material, Feyd. I don't waste good material. You persist, however, in refusing to learn my true value to you. You are obstinate. You do not see why I should be preserved as someone of the utmost value to you. This...
He gestured at the evidence of the struggle in the bedchamber.
This was foolishness. I do not reward foolishness.
Get to the point, you old fool, Feyd-Rautha thought.
You think of me as an old fool. I must dissuade you of that.
You speak of a bargain.
Ah, the impatience of youth. Well, this is the substance of it then. You will cease these foolish attempts on my life, and I, when you are ready for it, will step aside in your favor. I will retire to an advisory position, leaving you in the seat of power.
Retire, Uncle?
You still think me the fool, and this but confirms it, eh? You think I'm begging you. Step cautiously, Feyd. This old fool saw through the shielded needle you planted in that slave boy's thigh. Right where I'd put my hand on it, eh? The smallest pressure and sneak. A poison needle in the old fool's palm. Ah, Feyd.
The Baron shook his head, thinking it would have worked too if Howard hadn't warned me. Well, let the lad believe I saw the plot on my own. In a way, I did. I was the one who saved Howard from the wreckage of Arrakis, and this lad needs greater respect for my prowess. Fade Routher remained silent, struggling with himself. Is he being truthful? Does he really mean to return? Why not? I'm sure to succeed him one day if I move carefully. He can't live forever. Perhaps it was foolish to try hurrying the process.
Speak of a bargain. What pledge do we give to bind it?
How can we trust each other, eh? Well, Fade, as for you, I'm setting Thufir Hawat to watch over you. I trust Hawat's capabilities in this. You understand me? And as for me, you'll have to take me on faith. But I can't live forever, can I, Fade? And perhaps you should begin to suspect now that there are things I know which you should know.
I give you my pledge. And what do you give me?
I let you go living.
Again, Fade Routher studied his uncle. He sets Howard over me. What would he say if I told him Howard planned the trick with the gladiator that cost him his slave master? He'd likely say I was lying in the attempt to discredit Howard. No, the good Thufir is a mentat, and has anticipated this moment.
Well, what do you say?
What can I say? I accept, of course.
And Fade Routher thought, Howard, he plays both ends against the middle. Is that it? Has he moved to my uncle's camp because I didn't counsel with him over the slave boy attempt?
You haven't said anything about my setting Hawat to watch you.
Fade Routher betrayed anger by a flaring of nostrils. The name of Howard had been a danger signal in the Harkonnen family for so many years, and now it had a new meaning. Still dangerous.
Howard's a dangerous...
Boy, don't be stupid. I know what I have in Hawat, and how to control it. Hawat has deep emotions, Fade. The man without emotions is the one to fear, but deep emotions, huh? Now those can be bent to your needs.
Uncle, I don't understand you.
Yes, that's plain enough.
Only a flicker of eyelids betrayed the passage of resentment through Fade Routher.
And you do not understand Hawat.
Nor do you, Fade Routher thought.
Who does Hawat blame for his present circumstances? Me? Certainly. But he was an Atreides tool and bested me for years until the Imperium took a hand. That's how he sees it. His hate for me is a casual thing now. He believes he can best me any time. Believing this, he is bested. For I direct his attention where I want it, against the Imperium.
Tensions of a new understanding drew tight lines across Fade Routher's forehead, thinned his mouth.
Against the Emperor?
Let my dear nephew try the taste of that, the Baron thought. Let him say to himself, the Emperor Fade Routher Harkonnen. Let him ask himself how much that's worth. Surely it must be worth the life of one old uncle who could make that dream come to pass. Slowly, Fade Routher wet his lips with his tongue. Could it be true what the old fool was saying? There was more here than there seemed to be.
And what has Howard to do with it?
He thinks he uses us to wreak his revenge upon the Emperor.
And when that's accomplished?
He does not think beyond his revenge. Howat's a man who must serve others, and doesn't even know this about himself.
I've learned much from Howard.
Fade Routher felt the truth of the words as he spoke them.
But the more I learn, the more I feel we should dispose of him. And soon.
You don't like the idea? Withdraw the antidote. Death will sheathe him.
In a way, it's like the arena. Feints within feints within feints.
There we
You
go.
watch to see which way the gladiator leans, which way he looks, how he holds his knife.
He nodded to himself, seeing that these words pleased his uncle, but thinking, yes, like the arena, and the cutting edge is the mind.
Now you see you need me. I'm yet of use, Fade.
A sword to be wielded until he's too blunt for use, Fade Routher thought.
Yes, Uncle.
And now we will go to the slave quarters, we two. And I will watch while you, with your own hands, kill all the women in the pleasure ring.
Uncle.
There will be other women, Fade. But I have said that you do not make a mistake casually with me.
Feyd-Rautha's face darkened.
Uncle, you...
You will accept your punishment and learn something from it.
Feyd-Rautha met the gloating stare in his uncle's eyes. And I must remember this night, he thought. And remembering it, I must remember other nights.
You will not refuse.
What could you do if I refused, old man? Feyd-Rautha asked himself. But he knew there might be some other punishment, perhaps a more subtle one, a more brutal lever to bend him.
I know you, Fate. You will not refuse.
All right, Feyd-Rautha thought. I need you now. I see that. The bargain's made. But I'll not always need you. And someday...
Deep in the human unconscious is a pervasive need for a logical universe that makes sense. But the real universe is always one step beyond logic. From Sayings of the Muad'Dib by the Princess Elon.
I've sat across from many rulers of great houses, but never seen a more gross and dangerous pig than this one. Thufir Hawat. You may speak plainly with me, Hawat, the Baron rumbled. He leaned back in his suspensor chair, the eyes in their folds of fat boring into Hawat. The old Mentat looked down at the table between him and the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, noting the opulence of its grain. Even this was a factor to consider in assessing the Baron, as were the red walls of this private conference room, and the faint, sweet herb scent that hung on the air, masking a deeper musk. You didn't have me send that warning to Raban as an idle whim, the Baron said. Hawat's leathery old face remained impassive, betraying none of the loathing he felt. I suspect many things, my lord, he said. Yes. Well, I wish to know how Arrakis figures in your suspicions about Salusa Secundus. It is not enough that you say to me the Emperor is in a ferment about some association between Arrakis and his mysterious prison planet. Now, I rushed the warning out to Raban only because our courier had to leave on that highliner. You said there could be no delay. Well and good. But now I will have... He babbles too much, Howard thought. He's not like Leto, who could tell me a thing with the lift of an eyebrow or the wave of a hand. Nor like the old Duke, who could express an entire sentence in the way he accented a single word. This is a clod. Destroying him will... You will not leave here until I've had a full and complete explanation, the Baron said. You speak too casually of Salusa Secundus, Howard said. It's a penal colony, the Baron said. The worst riff-raff in the galaxy are sent to Salusa Secundus. What else do we need to know? That conditions on the prison planet are more oppressive than anywhere else, Howard said. You hear that the mortality rate among new prisoners is higher than 60%. You hear that the Emperor practices every form of oppression there. You hear all this, and do... The Emperor doesn't permit the great houses to inspect his prison, the Baron growled. But he hasn't seen into my dungeons either. And curiosity about Salusa Secundus is, Howard put a bony finger to his lips, discouraged. So he's not proud of some of the things he must do there. Howard allowed the faintest of smiles to touch his dark lips. His eyes glinted in the glow tube light as he stared at the Baron. And you've never wondered where the Emperor gets his sardaukar? The Baron pursed his fat lips. This gave his features the look of a pouting baby, and his voice carried a tone of petulance as he said, Why, he recruits. That is to say, there are the levies, and he enlists from... Fah! Howard snapped. The stories you hear about the exploits of the sardaukar, they're not rumors, are they? Those are first-hand accounts from a limited number of survivors who fought against the sardaukar, eh? The sardaukar are excellent fighting men, no doubt of it, the Baron said. But I think my own legions are holiday excursionists by comparison, Howard snarled. You think I don't know why the Emperor turned against House Atreides? This is not a realm open to your speculation, the Baron warned. Is it possible that even he doesn't know what motivated the Emperor in this? Howard asked himself. Any area is open to my speculation if it does what you've hired me to do, Howard said. I am a mentat. You do not withhold information or computation lines from a mentat. For a long minute, the Baron stared at him. Then, say what you must say, mentat. The Padishah Emperor turned against House Atreides because the Duke's war masters, Gurney Haddock and Duncan Idaho, had trained a fighting force, a small fighting force, to within a hair as good as the Sardaukar. Some of them were even better. And the Duke was in a position to enlarge his force, to make it every bit as strong as the Emperor's. The Baron weighed this disclosure. Then, what has Arrakis to do with this? It provides a pool of recruits already committed to the bitterest survival training. The Baron shook his head. You cannot mean the Fremen. I mean the Fremen. Then why warn Raban? There cannot be more than a handful of Fremen left after the Sardaukar pogrom and Raban's oppression. Howard continued to stare at him silently. Not more than a handful, the Baron repeated. Raban killed 6,000 of them last year alone. Still, Howard stared at him. And the year before it was 9,000, the Baron said. The Sardaukar must have accounted for at least 20,000. What are Raban's troop losses for the past 2 years? Howard asked. The Baron rubbed his jowls. Well, he has been recruiting rather heavily, to be sure. His agents make rather extravagant promises, and shall we say 30,000 in round numbers? Howard asked. That would seem a little high, the Baron said. Quite the contrary, Howard said. I can read between the lines of Raban's reports as well as you can. And you certainly must have understood my reports from our agents. Arrakis is a fierce planet, the Baron said. Storm losses can... We both know the figure for storm accretion, Howard said. What if he has lost 30,000? The Baron demanded, and blood darkened his face. By your own count, Howard said, he killed 15,000 over 2 years, while losing twice that number. You say the Sardaukar accounted for another 20,000, possibly a few more, and I've seen the transportation manifests for their return from Arrakis. If they killed 20,000, they lost almost 5 for 1. Why won't you face these figures, Baron, and understand what they mean? The Baron spoke in a coldly measured cadence. This is your job, mentat. What do they mean? I gave you Duncan Idaho's head count on the
Hey,
Sietch.
just Nickel Moore, how you doing?
It all fits. If they had just 250 such Sietch communities, their population would be
Hope
about
you're
5
doing
million.
well.
My best estimate is that they had at least twice that many communities. You scatter your population on such a planet. 10 million? The Baron's jowls quivered with amazement. At least. The Baron pursed his fat lips. The beady eyes stared without wavering at Howard. Is this true mentat computation? He wondered. No one suspect. We haven't even cut heavily into their birth rate growth figure, Howard said. We've just weeded out some of their less successful specimens, leaving the strong to grow stronger, just like on Salusa Secundus. Salusa Secundus, the Baron barked. What has this to do with the Emperor's prison planet? The man who survives Salusa Secundus starts out tougher than most others, Howard said. When you add the very best of military training... Nonsense! By your argument, I could recruit from among the Fremen after the way they've been oppressed by my nephew. Howard spoke in a mild voice. Don't you oppress any of your troops? Well, but oppression is a relative thing, Howard said. Your fighting men are much better off than those around them, hey? They see unpleasant alternatives to being soldiers of the Baron, hey? The Baron fell silent, eyes unfocused. The possibilities. Had Raban unwittingly given House Harkonnen its ultimate weapon? Presently, he said, how could you be sure of the loyalty of such recruits? I would take them in small groups, not larger than platoon strength, Howard said. I'd remove them from their oppressive situation and isolate them with a training cadre of people who understood their background. Preferably people who had preceded them from the same oppressive situation. Then I'd fill them with the mystique that their planet had really been a secret training ground to produce just such superior beings as themselves. And all the while I'd show them what such superior beings could earn. Rich living, beautiful women, fine mansions, whatever they desired. The Baron began to nod. The way the Sardaukar live at home. The recruits place as Salusa Secundus is justified because it produced them, the elite. The commonest Sardaukar trooper lives a life in many respects as exalted as that of any member of a great house. Such an idea, Baron whispered. You begin to share my suspicions, Howard said. Where did such a thing start? The Baron asked. Ah, yes. Where did House Corino originate? Were there people on Salusa Secundus before the Emperor sent his first contingents of prisoners there? Even the Duke Leto, a cousin on the distaff side, never knew for sure. Such questions are not encouraged. The Baron's eyes glazed with thought. Yes, a very carefully kept secret. They'd used every device of... Besides, what's there to conceal? Howard asked. That the Padishah Emperor has a prison planet? Everyone knows this. That he has... Count Fenring, the Baron blurted. Howard broke off, studied the Baron with a puzzled frown. What of Count Fenring? At my nephew's birthday, several years ago, the Baron said. This imperial popinjay, Count Fenring, came as official observer and to conclude a business arrangement between the Emperor and myself. So, in one of our conversations, I believe I said something about making a prison planet of Arrakis. Fenring, what did you say exactly? Howard asked. Exactly. That was quite a while ago, and my Lord Baron, if you wish to make the best use of my services, you must give me adequate information. Wasn't this conversation recorded? The Baron's face darkened with anger. You're as bad as Piter. I don't like these. Piter is no longer with you, my lord, Howard said. As to that, whatever did happen to Piter? He became too familiar, too demanding of me, the Baron said. You assure me you don't waste a useful man, Howard said. Will you waste me by threats and quibbling? We were discussing what you said to Count Fenring. Slowly the Baron composed his features. When the time comes, he thought, I'll remember his manner with me. Yes, I will remember. One moment, the Baron said, and he thought back to the meeting in his great hall. It helped to visualize the cone of silence in which they had stood. I said something like this, the Baron said. The Emperor knows a certain amount of killing has always been an arm of business. I was referring to workforce losses. Then I said something about another solution to the Arakeen problem, and I said the Emperor's prison planet inspired me to emulate him. Which blood? Howard snapped. What did Fenring say? That's when he began questioning me about you. Howard sat back, closed his eyes in thought. So that's why they started looking into Arrakis, he said. Well, the thing's done. He opened his eyes. They must have spies all over Arrakis by now. 2 years. But certainly my innocent suggestion that nothing is innocent in an Emperor's eyes. What were your instructions to Raban? Merely that he should teach Arrakis to fear us. Howard shook his head. You now have 2 alternatives, Baron. You can kill off the natives, wipe them out entirely, or waste an entire workforce. Would you prefer to have the Emperor and those great houses he can still swing behind him come in here and perform retment? Scrape out Gede Prime like a hollow gourd? The Baron studied his mentat, then... He wouldn't dare. Wouldn't he? The Baron's lips quivered. What is your alternative? Abandon your dear nephew, Raban. Aban? The Baron broke off, stared at Howard. Send him no more troops, no aid of any kind. Don't answer his messages other than to say you've heard of the terrible way he's handled things on Arrakis, and you intend to take corrective measures as soon as you're able. I'll arrange to have some of your messages intercepted by Imperial spies. But what of the spice, the revenues, the demands your baronial profits, but be careful how you make your demands. Require fixed sums of Raban. We can... The Baron turned his hands palm up. But how can I be certain that my weasel nephew isn't... We still have our spies on Arrakis. Tell Raban he either meets the spice quotas you set him or he'll be replaced. I know my nephew, the Baron said. This would only make him oppress the population even more. Of course he will, Howard snapped. You don't want that stopped now. You merely want your own hands clean. Let Raban make your Salusa Secundus for you. There's no need even to send him any prisoners. He has all the population required. If Raban is driving his people to meet your spice quotas, then the Emperor need suspect no other motive. That's reason enough for putting the planet on the rack. And you, Baron, will not show by word or action that there's any other reason for this. The Baron could not keep the sly tone of admiration out of his voice. Ah, Howard, you are a devious one. Now, how do we move into Arrakis and make use of what Raban prepares? That's the simplest thing of all, Baron. If you set each year's quota a bit higher than the one before, matters will soon reach a head there. Production will drop off. You can remove Raban and take over yourself to correct the mess. It fits, the Baron said. But I can feel myself tiring of all this. I'm preparing another to take over Arrakis for me. Hawat studied the fat, round face across from him. Slowly, the old soldier spy began to nod his head. Fade Routher, he said. So that's the reason for the oppression now. You're very devious yourself, Baron. Perhaps we can incorporate these two schemes. Yes. Your Fade Routher can go to Arrakis as their savior. He can win the populace. Yes. The Baron smiled. And behind his smile, he asked himself, now, how does this fit in with Howard's personal scheming? And Howard, seeing that he was dismissed, arose and left the red-walled room. As he walked, he could not put down the disturbing unknowns that cropped into every computation about Arrakis. This new religious leader that Gurney Halleck hinted at from his hiding place among the smugglers, this Wadi. Perhaps I should not have told the Baron to let this religion flourish where it will, even among the folk of Raven, he told himself. But it's well known that repression makes a religion flourish. And he thought about Halleck's reports on Fremen tactics. The tactics smacked of Halleck himself, and Idaho, and even of Howard. Did Idaho survive? He asked himself. But this was a futile question. He did not yet ask himself if it was possible that Paul had survived. He knew the Baron was convinced that all Atreides were dead. The Bene Gesserit witch had been his weapon, the Baron admitted, and that could only mean an end to all, even to the woman's own son. What a poisonous hate she must have had for the Atreides, he thought. Something like the hate I hold for this Baron. Will my blow be as final and complete as hers?
There is in all things a pattern that is part of our universe. It has symmetry, elegance, and grace. Those qualities you find always in that which the true artist captures. You can find it in the turning of the seasons, in the way sand trails along a ridge, in the branch or the pattern of its leaves. We try to copy these patterns in our lives and our society, seeking the rhythms, the dances, the forms that comfort. Yet, it is possible to see peril in the finding of ultimate. It's clear that the ultimate pattern contains its own fixity. In such perfection, all things move toward death. From the collected sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
Paul Muad'Dib remembered that there had been a meal heavy with spice essence. He clung to this memory because it was an anchor point, and he could tell himself from this vantage that his immediate experience must be a dream. I am a theatre of processes, he told himself. I am a prey to the imperfect vision, to the race consciousness and its terrible purpose. Yet he could not escape the fear that he had somehow overrun himself, lost his position in time, so that past and future and present mingled without distinction. It was a kind of visual fatigue, and it came, he knew, from the constant necessity of holding the prescient future as a kind of memory that was in itself a thing intrinsically of the past. Cheney prepared the meal for me, he told himself. Yet Cheney was deep in the south, in the cold country where the sun was hot, secreted in one of the new Sietch strongholds, safe with their son, Leto II. Or was that a thing yet to happen? No, he reassured himself. A strange one. His sister had gone there with his mother and with Cheney, a 20-thumper trip into the south, riding a reverend mother's palanquin fixed to the back of a wild maker. He shied away from the thought of riding the giant worms, asking himself, or is Alia yet to be born? I was on a razzia, Paul recalled. I went raiding to recover the water of our dead in Arakim, and I found the remains of my father in the funeral pyre. I enshrined the skull of my father in a Fremen rock mound overlooking Haag Pass. Or was that a thing yet to be? My wounds are real, Paul told himself. My scars are real. The shrine of my father's skull is real. Still in the dreamlike state, Paul remembered that Hera, James's wife, had intruded on him once to say there'd been a fight in the Sietch corridor. That had been the interim Sietch, before the women and children had been sent into the deep south. Hera had stood there in the entrance to the inner chamber, the black wings of her hair tied back by water rings on a chain. She had held aside the chamber's hangings and told him that Cheney had just killed someone. This happened, Paul told himself. This was real, not born out of its time and subject to change. Paul remembered he had rushed out to find Cheney standing beneath the yellow globes of the corridor, clad in a brilliant blue wraparound robe with hood thrown back, a flush of exertion on her elfin features. She had been sheathing her crysknife. A huddled group had been hurrying away down the corridor with a burden. And Paul remembered telling himself, you always know when they're carrying a body. Cheney's water rings, worn openly in Sietch on a cord around her neck, tinkled as she turned toward him. Cheney, what is this? He asked. I dispatched one who came to challenge you in single combat, Usul. You killed him? Yes, but perhaps I should have left him for Hera. And Paul recalled how the faces of the people around them had showed appreciation for these words. Even Hera had laughed. But he came to challenge me. You trained me yourself in the weirding way, Usul. Certainly, but you shouldn't. I was born in the desert, Usul. I know how to use a crysknife. He suppressed his anger, tried to talk reasonably. This may all be true, Cheney, but I am no longer a child hunting scorpions in the Sietch by the light of a hand globe, Usul. I do not play games. Paul glared at her, caught by the odd ferocity beneath her casual attitude. He was not worthy, Usul, Cheney said. I'd not disturb your meditations with the likes of him. She moved closer, looking at him out of the corners of her eyes, dropping her voice so that only he might hear. And, beloved, when it's learned that a challenger may face me and be brought to shameful death by Muad'Dib's woman, there'll be fewer challengers. Yes, Paul told himself. That has certainly happened. It was true past, and the number of challengers testing the new blade of Muad'Dib did drop dramatically. Somewhere, in a world not of the dream, there was a hint of motion, the cry of a night bird. I dream, Paul reassured himself. It's the spirit. Still, there was about him a feeling of abandonment. He wondered if it might be possible that his true spirit had slipped over somehow into the world where the Fremen believed he had his true existence, into the Alam al-Mithal, that metaphysical realm where all physical limitations were removed. And he knew feared at the thought of such a place, because removal of all limitations meant removal of all points of reference. In the landscape of a myth, he would orient himself and say, I am I, because I am here. His mother had once said, the people are divided, some of them, in how they think of you. I must be waking from the dream, Paul told himself. For this had happened. These words from his mother, the Lady Jessica, who was now a reverend mother of the Fremen, these words had passed through reality. Jessica was fearful of the religious relationship between himself and she didn't like the fact that people of both Sietch and Graben referred to Muad'Dib as him, and she went questioning among the tribe, sending out her Sayadina spies, collecting their answers and brooding on them. She had quoted a Bene Gesserit proverb to him. When religion and politics travel in the same cart, the riders believe nothing can stand in their way. Their movement becomes headlong, faster and faster and faster. They put aside all thought of obstacles and forget that a precipice does not show itself to a man in a blind rush until it's too late. Paul recalled that he had sat there in his mother's quarters in the inner chamber, shrouded by dark hangings with their surfaces covered by woven patterns out of Fremen mythology. He had sat there, hearing her out, noting the way she was always observing, even when her eyes were lowered. Her oval face had new lines in it at the corners of the mouth, but the hair was still like polished bronze. The wide-set green eyes, though, hid beneath their overcasting of spice-imbued blue. The Fremen have a simple, practical religion, he said. Nothing about religion is simple, she warned. But Paul, seeing the clouded future that still hung over them, found himself swayed by anger. He could only say, religion unifies our forces. It's our mystique. You deliberately cultivate this air, this bravura, she charged. You never cease indoctrinating. Thus you yourself taught me, he said. But she had been full of contentions and arguments that day. It had been the day of the circumcision ceremony for little later. Paul had understood some of the reasons for her upset. She had never accepted his liaison, the marriage of youth with Cheney. But Cheney had produced an Atreides son, and Jessica had found herself unable to reject the child with the mother. Jessica had stirred finally under his stare, said, You think me an unnatural mother? Of course not. I see the way you watch me when I'm with your sister. You don't understand about your sister. I know why Aliyah is different, he said. She was unborn, part of you, when you changed the water of life. You know nothing of it. And Paul, suddenly unable to express the knowledge gained out of its time, said only, I don't think you unnatural. She saw his distress, said, There is a thing, son. Yes? I do love your Cheney. I accept her. This was real, Paul told himself. This wasn't the imperfect vision, to be changed by the twistings out of time's own birth. The reassurance gave him a new hold on his world. Bits of solid reality began to dip through the dream state into his awareness. He knew suddenly that he was in a Hirek, a desert camp. Cheney had planted their still tent on flower sand for its softness. That could only mean Cheney was nearby. Cheney, his soul. Cheney, his Sihaya, sweet as the desert spring. Cheney, up from the palmaries of the deep south. Now he remembered her singing a sand shanty to him in the time for sleep. Oh, my soul, have no taste for paradise this night, and I swear by Shai Hulud you will go there, obedient to my love. And she had sung the walking song lovers shared on the sand, its rhythm like the drag of the dunes against the feet. Tell me of thine eyes, and I will tell thee of my heart. Tell me of thy feet, and I will tell thee of thy hands. Tell me of thy sleeping, and I will tell thee of thy waking. Tell me of thy desires, and I will tell thee of thy need. He had heard someone strumming a baliset in another tent, and he thought then of Gurney Halleck. Reminded by the familiar instrument, he had thought of Gurney, whose face he had seen in a smuggler band, but who had not seen him, could not see him, or know of him, lest that inadvertently lead the Harkonnens to the son of the Duke they had killed. But the style of the player in the night, the distinctiveness of the fingers on the baliset's strings brought the real musician back to Paul's memory. It had been Khat the Leper, captain of the Fadaiki, leader of the Death Commanders who guarded Muad'Dib. in the desert, or remember. We are in the central earth beyond the Harkonnen patrols. I am here to walk the sand, to lure a maker and mount him my own cunning that I may be a Fremen entire. He felt now the mauler pistol at his neck, the crisp. He felt the silence surrounding him. It was that special pre-morning silence when the night birds had gone and the day creatures had not yet signaled their alertness to their enemy, the sun. You must ride the sand in the light of day, that Shai Hulud shall see and know you have no fear, Stilgar had said. Thus we turn our time around and set ourselves to sleep this night. Quietly, Paul sat up, feeling the looseness of a slacked stillsuit around his body, the shadowed still tent beyond. So softly he moved. Yet Cheney heard. She spoke from the tent's gloom, another shadow there. It's not yet full light, beloved. Sihaya, he said, speaking with half a laugh in his voice. You call me your desert spring, she said. But this day I'm thy goad. I am the Sayadina who watches your way. He tightened his stillsuit. You told me the words of the Kitab al-Ibar, he said. You told me, woman is thy field. Go then to thy field and till it. I am the mother of thy firstborn, she agreed. He saw her in the greyness, matching him movement for movement, securing her stillsuit for the open desert. You should get all the rest you can, she said. He recognized her love for him speaking then and chided her gently. The Sayadina of the Watch does not caution or warn the candidate. She slid across to his side, touched his cheek with her palm. Today, I am both the Watcher and the woman. You should have left this duty to another, he said. Waiting is bad enough at best, she said. I'd sooner be at thy side. He kissed her palm before securing the face flap of his suit, then turned and cracked the seal of the tent. The air that came in was chill, not quite warm, precipitate traced dew in the dawn. With it came the smell of a pre-spice mass, the mass they had detected off to the northeast, and that told them there would be a maker nearby. Paul crawled through the sphincter opening, stood on the sand and stretched the sleep from his muscles. A faint green pearl luminescence etched the eastern horizon. The tents of his troop were small, false dunes around him in the gloom. He saw movement off to the left, the guard, and knew they had seen him. They knew the peril he faced this day. Each Fremen had faced it. They gave him this last few moments of isolation now that he might prepare himself. It mustn't be done today, he told himself. He thought of the power he wielded in the face of the pogrom. The old men who sent their sons to him to be trained in the weirding way of battle. The old men who listened to him now in council and followed his plans. The men who returned to pay him that highest Fremen compliment. Your plan worked, Wadi. Yet the meanest and smallest of the Fremen warriors could do a thing that he had never done. And Paul knew his leadership suffered from the omnipresent knowledge of this difference between them. He had not ridden the Maker. Oh, he'd gone up with the others for training trips and raids, but he had not made his own voyage. Until he did, his world was bounded by the abilities of others. No true Fremen could permit this. Until he did this thing himself, even the great Southlands, the area some 20 thumpers beyond the Urg, were denied him unless he ordered a palanquin to go to take Reverend Mother or one of the sick and wounded. Memory returned to him of his wrestling with his inner awareness during the night. He saw a strange parallel here. If he mastered the Maker, his rule was strengthened. If he mastered the inward eye, this carried its own measure of command. But beyond them both lay the cloud, the great unrest where all the universe seemed embroiled. The differences in the ways he comprehended the universe haunted him, accuracy matched with inaccuracy. He saw it in situ. Yet, when it was born, when it came into the pressures of reality, the now had its own life and grew with its own subtle differences. Terrible purpose remained. Race consciousness remained. And over all loomed the jihad, bloody and wild. Cheney joined him outside the tent, hugging her elbows, looking up at him from the corners of her eyes the way she did when she studied his mood. "Tell me again about the waters of thy birth world, Uso," she said. He saw that she was trying to distract him, ease his mind of tensions before the deadly test. It was growing lighter, and he noted that some of his Fedaykin were already striking their tents. "I'd rather you told me about the Sietch and about our son," he said. "Does our Leto yet hold my mother in his palm?" "It's Aliyah he holds as well," she said. "And he grows rapidly. He'll be a big man." "What's it like in the south?" he asked. "When you ride the Maker, you'll see for yourself," she said. "But I wish to see it first through your eyes. It's powerfully lonely," she said. He touched the
Hey,
Nigerian
Nightmare,
scarf
how you
at her
doing,
forehead
bro?
where it protruded from her still-suit cap.
Definitely appreciate it, brother.
"Why will you not talk about the
And hope you
Sietch?"
have a good,
"I have talked about it.
good
The
evening.
Sietch is a
Or
lonely
night's
place
sleep,
without
should
my
I
men.
say.
It's a place of work. We labor in the factories and the potting rooms. There are weapons to be made, poles to plant that we may forecast the weather, spice to collect for the brides. There are dunes to be planted to make them grow and to anchor them. There are fabrics and rugs to make, fuel
Hey,
cells
Grandpa.
to charge. There are children to train, that the tribe's strength may never
Definitely
be
appreciate
lost.
it.
Is nothing then pleasant?
I'm
in
surprised
the
you're
Sietch?
still up,
He
Grandpa.
asked. The children are pleasant. We observe the rites. We have sufficient food. Sometimes one of us may come north to be with her man. Life must go on. My sister, Aliyah, is she accepted yet by the people? Cheney turned toward him in the growing dawn light. Her eyes bored into
Hey, Gramps.
It's a thing to be discussed another time, beloved. Let us discuss it now.
You
shall
have a
conserve
good
your
night
energies
too,
for the test,"
Nightmare.
she said. He saw that he had touched something sensitive, hearing the withdrawal in her voice. "The unknown brings its own worries," he said. Presently she nodded, said, "There is yet misunderstanding because of Aliyah's strangeness. The women are fearful because a child, little more than an
Playing
infant,
zombies,
talks
nice.
of things that only an adult should know. They do not understand the change in the womb that made Aliyah different." "There is trouble?" he asked, and he thought, "I've seen visions of trouble over Aliyah." Cheney looked toward the growing line of the sunrise. Some of the women banded to accuse the Reverend Mother. They demanded she exorcise the demon in her daughter. They quoted the scripture, "Suffer not a witch to live among us." And what did my mother say to them? She recited the law and sent the women away abashed. She said, "If Aliyah incites trouble, it is the fault of authority for not foreseeing and preventing the trouble." And she tried to explain how the change had worked on Aliyah in the womb. But the women were angry because they had been embarrassed. They went away muttering. There will be trouble because of Aliyah, he thought. A crystal blowing of sand touched the exposed portions of his face, bringing the scent of the pre-spice mass. El-Siyah, the rain of sand that brings the morning, he said. He looked out across the grey light of the desert landscape, the landscape beyond pity, the sand that was form absorbed in itself. Dry lightning streaked a dark corner to the south, sign that a storm had built up its static charge there. The roll of thunder boomed long after. "The voice that beautifies the land," Cheney said. Most of his men were stirring out of their tents. Guards were coming in from the rims. Everything
Yeah,
around
Grandpa,
him
can't
moved
do any
smoothly
type of
in an
online
ancient
playing right
routine
now.
that required no orders. "Give as few orders as possible," his father had told him. Once, long ago. "Once you've given orders on a subject, you must always give orders on that subject." The Fremen knew this rule instinctively. The troop's watermaster began the morning shanty, adding to it now the call for the right to initiate a sand rider. "The world is a carcass," the man chanted, his voice wailing across the dunes. "Who can turn away the angel of death? What Shai Hulud has decreed must be." All listened, recognizing that these were the words that also began the death chant of his Fedaykin. The words the death commandos recited as they hurled themselves into battle. Will there be a rock shrine here this day to mark the passing of another soul? Paul asked himself. Will Fremen stop here in the future, each to add another stone and think
I
of
will
one
once
he
I
who
get the
died
extra
in this
money.
place?
Just
He knew
that
this was among
the
the
way,
alternatives today. A
the
fact
timing
along
on
lines of the future radiating from this position in time-space.
the timing on everything when I got my money and didn't
The more he resisted his terrible
coincide with
purpose and fought
everything that's
against
supposed
the
to get
coming of the
taken off when
jihad,
it was
the
supposed
greater
to.
the turmoil that wove through his prescience. His entire future was becoming like a river hurtling toward a chasm, the violent nexus beyond which all was fog and clouds. Stilgar approaches, Cheney said. I must stand apart now, beloved. Now, I must be Sayadina, and observe the rite that it may be reported truly in the chronicles. She looked up at him, and for a moment her reserve slipped. Then she had herself under control.
If I was able to,
I shall prepare thy
I'd be
breakfast
doing
with
it
my
for a
own
year at a
hands.
time. I just don't have the money for that.
Stilgar moved toward him across the flower sand, stirring up little
Eventually.
bubbles. The dark niches of his eyes remained steady on Paul with their untamed stare. The glimpse of black beard above the stillsuit mask, the lines of craggy cheeks, could have been wind-etched from the native rock for all their movement. The man carried Paul's banner on its staff, the green and black banner with a water tube in the staff that already was a legend in the land. Half pridefully, Paul thought, I cannot do the
Yeah, yeah, Grandpa, you have a good
becoming a
one.
legend. They will
Definitely
mark how I
appreciate you stopping
parted from
by.
Cheney, how I greet Stilgar, every move I make this day. Live or die, it is a legend. I must not die. Then it will be only legend, and nothing to stop the jihad. Stilgar planted the staff in the sand beside Paul, dropped his hands to his sides. The blue within blue eyes remained level and intent, and Paul thought how his own eyes already were assuming this mask of color from the spice. They denied us the Had, Stilgar said with ritual solemnity. As Cheney had taught him, Paul responded, Who can deny a Fremen the right to walk or ride where he wills? I am a Naib, Stilgar said, never to be taken alive. I am a leg of the death tripod that will destroy our foes. Silence settled over them. Paul glanced at the other Fremen scattered over the sand beyond Stilgar, at the way they stood without moving for this moment of personal prayer. And he thought of how the Fremen were a people whose living consisted of killing, an entire people who had lived with rage and grief all of their days, never once considering what might take the place of either, except for a dream with which Liet Kynes had infused them before his death. Where is the Lord who led us through the land of desert and of pits? Stilgar asked. He is ever with us, the Fremen chanted. Stilgar squared his shoulders, stepped closer to Paul and lowered his voice. Now, remember what I told you. Do it simply and directly, nothing fancy. Among our people, we ride the Maker at the age of 12. You are more than 6 years beyond that age and not born to this life. You don't have to impress anyone with your courage. We know you are brave. All you must do is call the Maker and ride him. I will remember, Paul said. See that you do. I'll not have you shame my teaching. Stilgar pulled a plastic rod about a meter long from beneath his robe. The thing was pointed at one end, had a spring-wound clapper at the other end. I prepared this thumper myself. It's a good one. Take it. Paul felt the warm smoothness of the plastic as he accepted the thumper. Shishakli has your hooks, Stilgar said. He'll hand them to you as you step out onto that dune over there. He pointed to his right. Call the big Maker, Usul. Show us the way. Paul marked the tone of Stilgar's voice, half ritual and half that of a worried friend. In that instant, the sun seemed to bound above the horizon. The sky took on the silvered grey blue that warned this day would be a day of extreme heat and dryness even for Arrakis. It is the time of the scalding day, Stilgar said, and now his voice was entirely ritual. Go, Usul, and ride the Maker. Travel the sand as a leader of men. Paul saluted his banner, noting how the green and black flag hung limply now that the dawn wind had died. He turned toward the dune Stilgar had indicated, a dirty tan slope with an S-track crest. Already, most of the troop were moving out in the opposite direction, climbing the other dune that had sheltered their camp. One robed figure remained in Paul's path. Shishakli, a squad leader of Vadaikin, only his slope-lidded eyes visible between still-suit cap and mask. Shishakli presented two thin, whip-like shafts as Paul approached. The shafts were about 1.5 meters long, with glistening plasteel hooks at one end, roughened at the other end for a firm grip. Paul accepted them both in his left hand as required by the ritual. "They are my own hooks," Shishakli said in a husky voice. "They never have failed." Paul nodded, maintaining the necessary silence, moved past the men and up the dune slope. At the crest, he glanced back, saw the troop scattering like a flight of insects, their robes fluttering. He stood alone now on the sandy ridge, with only the horizon in front of him, the flat and unmoving horizon. This was a good dune Stilgar had chosen, higher than its companions for the viewpoint advantage. Stooping, Paul planted the thumper deep into the windward face where the sand was compacted and would give maximum transmission to the drumming. Then he hesitated, reviewing the lessons, reviewing the life and death necessities that faced him. When he threw the latch, the thumper would begin its summons. Across the sand, a giant worm, a maker, would hear and come to the drumming. With whip-like hook staffs, Paul knew, he could mount the maker's high, curving back. For as long as a forward edge of a worm's ring segment was held open by a hook, open to admit abrasive sand into the more sensitive interior, the creature would not retreat beneath the desert. It would, in fact, roll its gigantic body to bring the opened segment as far away from the desert surface as possible. "I am a sand rider," Paul told himself. He glanced down at the hooks in his left hand, thinking that he had only to shift those hooks down the curve of a maker's immense side to make the creature roll and turn, guiding it where he would. He had seen it done. He had been helped up the side of a worm for a short ride in training. The captive worm could be ridden until it lay exhausted and quiescent upon the desert surface, and a new maker must be summoned. Once he was past this test, Paul knew, he was qualified to make the 20-thumper journey into the Southland, to rest and restore himself, into the South, where the women and the families had been hidden from the pogrom among the new Palmaries and Sietch warrens. He lifted his head and looked to the south, reminding himself that the maker summoned wild from the Urg was an unknown quantity, and the one who summoned it was equally unknown to this test. "You must gauge the approaching maker carefully," Stilgar had explained. "You must stand close enough that you can mount it as it passes, yet not so close that it engulfs you." With abrupt decision, Paul released the thumper's latch. The clapper began revolving, and the summons drummed through the sand. A measured lump, lump, lump. He straightened, scanning the horizon, remembering Stilgar's words. "Judge the line of approach carefully. Remember, a worm seldom makes an unseen approach to a thumper. Listen all the same. You may often hear it before you see it." And Cheney's words of caution, whispered at night when her fear for him overcame her, filled his mind. "When you take your stand along the Maker's path, you must remain utterly still. You must think like a patch of sand. Hide beneath your cloak and become a little dune in your very essence." Slowly he scanned the horizon, listening, watching for the signs he had been taught. It came from the southeast, a distant hissing, a sand whisper. Presently he saw the faraway outline of the creature's track against the dawn light, and realized he had never before seen a maker this large, never heard of one this size. It appeared to be more than half a league long, and the rise of the sand wave at its cresting head was like the approach of a mountain. "This is nothing I have seen by vision or in life," Paul cautioned himself. He hurried across the path of the thing to take his stand, caught up entirely by the rushing needs of this moment.
Control the coinage and the courts. Let the rabble have the rest. Thus the Padishah Emperor advised you, and he tells you, if you want profits, you must rule. There is truth in these words, but I ask myself, who are the rabble and who are the ruled? Muad'Dib's secret message to the Landsraad, from Arrakis Awakening by the Princess Irulan.
A thought came unbidden to Jessica's mind. Paul will be undergoing his Sandrider test at any moment now. They try to conceal this fact from me, but it's obvious. And Cheney has gone on some mysterious errand. Jessica sat in her resting chamber, catching a moment of quiet between the night's classes. It was a pleasant chamber, but not as large as the one she had enjoyed in Sietch Tabor, before their flight from the Pogrom. Still, this place had thick rugs on the floor, soft cushions, a low coffee table,
Didn't realize it was that late already.
multicolored hangings on the walls, and soft yellow glow globes overhead. The room was
to the stranger, but were specimens collected for
All right,
bacteriological
everyone.
analysis in
I'm
the course of
gonna call into
investigations
this
of the
live for
transmission
right
of
now
germ
for
diseases.
tonight.
He ordered them burnt.
I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.